we'll do the live thing first. Like, hey everybody, welcome back to the Bigmark podcast. It's me, your host, Bigmark. If it's your first time listening, welcome. If not, welcome back. Like I always say, if you want to support the podcast, go check us out at our Patreon at patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. You can always reach out to the podcast, let us know what you want to hear, DM us, tweet us, do all that fun stuff. Instagram at the Bigmark Pod and Twitter at the Bigmark Podcast. And if like I said, if you ever wanted to have any topics or wanted to be a guest, please come on. Like I said, some of my friends have reached out, and that's how we've got them on the show. So I'm always looking for new guests, and I can't wait to have you on the show. I had a lot of fun doing the vinyl podcast last time, and talking a little bit about music, and I kind of wanted to talk a little bit about movies today. Definitely another one of my passions, but probably one of my favorite movies of all time we're going to talk about today, called The Big Lebowski. Honestly, especially when I first started watching it, I think I first saw it in high school, I was in love with this movie. I still am to this day every time I watch it. It's one of those movies where it's kind of a little bit, I guess it's a little bit of a cult classic, but it's one of those movies that when you watch it again, it changes, and that's an interesting thing. Talked to some of my friends before, and everyone's kind of on one side or the other, but there's that whole thing about rewatching movies, rewatching shows, going back. It's really tough to kind of buy into one side or the other, because obviously just watching new stuff, and once you've watched something, you've seen it, you don't want to go back and see it. I understand that you can see a lot of new stuff, you can see a lot of really interesting things, obviously, because you can only watch and listen and hear and do all that stuff once or whatever, right? But where I come from, the side that I'm on is, when I rewatch things, I always seem to find something that I missed before. Whether even listening to music and doing all that stuff. Music for me is almost like a study. I find where I'm re-listening to songs again is to try and really figure them out. But with movies, I find, and there's always one rule I kind of live by too. Shout out Brian Callen. He always said, if you don't like a movie, before you say anything about it, watch it again. Give yourself some time, but watch it again, because you never know, maybe that day you were just in a bad mood, or you ate something weird, or it was bad circumstances, or reminded you of someone. I can't tell you how many things, books, movies, television, that I've tried to watch or tried to read or tried to look at a bunch of times, and the first few times it didn't work, but for whatever reason, I kept going back and kept trying, and then things really, really worked out. The Hobbit, when I read The Hobbit, it took me a bunch of tries to figure it out, but once I finished it, it was amazing. And again, I couldn't even list all the movies, but there's certain movies where the first time you watch it, you're like, oh, I don't know about this, and you watch it again, you're like, oh, okay, I kind of get it now. Or in many cases, it just reinforces that you really just don't like that movie. Sorry, Baby Driver. That one always does it for me. I've given that movie so many chances, and anyway, but this movie, when I watch it and I watch it again and I watch it again, it just never ceases to amaze me. It still makes me laugh. Just the situations are hilarious. It's amazing. If you've never seen the movie, please go watch it. Stop the podcast right now, because you're probably going to get some spoilers. But if you have watched it, I can't wait to kind of go along with you. And if you've only watched it once, maybe we'll prompt you to watch it again today, right? So a little bit about the movie, just before we kind of get into things here. I don't want to go over too much. Probably going to kind of scan the plot a little bit. I don't want to give away too many spoilers. I want to kind of talk about a little bit more of what really made this movie near and dear to my heart, and the little things. And I guess at the end of it, we'll kind of figure out like why it is such a cult classic, and potentially why it didn't make it to quite the mainstream fame, at least like many other of the movies done at the time. So The Big Lebowski actually came out in 1998, and it's a black comedy crime film. It produced and directed by Joel and Ethan Coen, the Coen brothers, tremendous, amazing. It stars Jeff Bridges as Jeffrey the Dude Lebowski, a Los Angeles slacker and avid bowler. Also starring David Huddleston. He was in Blazing Saddles. He was the judge and the producers. He was also in It's Always Sunny. Amazing actor, funny guy. He plays the Big Lebowski. John Goodman is in it. Amazing. Sam Elliott, who is the narrator of the movie, tremendous voice. He actually has some on-screen time too. Very, very cool. Julianne Moore's in it. She's great. Steve Buscemi is tremendous in it. Steve Buscemi, who plays Donnie in the movie, he puts on basically a clinic in how to act without being in the forefront. There's something, if I was going to make a sports analogy, there's something, you talk about basketball players who play well without the ball. You talk about how well they can play without the ball. And that's a really important thing, because sometimes athletes in general, I guess anyone who works in a team environment, when there's a main task being done, sometimes other job or other employees or other teammates might want to slack off a little bit. Or in the case of basketball, if you don't have the ball, you might feel like, oh, I don't have to really do too much. No one needs to really guard me. I can just stand here. But what you're doing without the ball and setting up other things, and of course there's plays in basketball where you're moving around, but again, the way you can think and still contribute to the team, even without actually having the ball and scoring a basket, how do you contribute to your team, while at the same time, get doing your job at the same time. Obviously, you don't have the ball, you're not going to score the 2 points, but what you did, maybe you set a pick, maybe you set someone up. Again, playing without the ball. We all understand how that works. Steve Buscemi in this movie acts without the ball amazingly. He's in these scenes, and he doesn't have a lot of lines, maybe he doesn't have a lot of speaking parts, but the way he stands and his mannerisms and his eyes and his facial expressions, they speak so much, and it just adds a depth to the scene and all that amazing stuff. John Turturro is in it, phenomenal. Philip Seymour Hoffman, R.I.P. Tara Reid, David Thewlis. He's Remus from Harry Potter. He's been in a bunch of stuff. Peter Stormare. He was in Fargo, Lost World, Jurassic Park, Prison Break. He's like that kind of generic Russian dude. And Ben Gazzara, who's a famous TV and stage actor. They were all in supporting roles. When the Coen brothers wrote the movie, they said it was loosely inspired by the work of Raymond Chandler. Chandler had an immense stylistic influence on American popular literature. He was an author, and the protagonist of many of his novels, Philip Marlowe, is considered by some to be synonymous with the private detective. So essentially, it's like the classic guy in the office with his name on the glass, and you come in there and he's wearing the hat and he's smoking a cigarette and he's got the gun in his holster, and you're trying to find someone, and hey, there's a crime that's been committed and now you got to go solve it, right? You know, there's many movies like that. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Obviously many more, you know, kind of more of the classical genre, but really interesting. So Joel Coen was saying, we wanted to do a Chandler kind of story, how it moves episodically and deals with the characters trying to unravel a mystery, as well as having a hopelessly complex plot that is ultimately unimportant, which is very, very true to form of the Big Lebowski. Again, you know, that brings us to the plot. Without going into too much depth here, there's so much more to the movie. The magic of the Big Lebowski really does. I watched it just before doing the podcast tonight. The beauty of the movie, honestly, is this: there's cinematography to it. There's dream sequences that the Coen brothers do that are just phenomenal. And I'll speak a little bit to what the Coen brothers movies truly are, kind of near the end. But again, just there's just almost a barrage of things that are happening. It's almost like the movie just kind of keeps you on your toes. Constant events happening, and there's so much where you almost feel I wouldn't go as far as unsettled, but just like you're just kind of off balance, and there's so many ins and outs and what have yous. It's just tremendous. So, you know, it's set in the early 90s, so there's a lot of like Gulf War references and stuff. Like I mentioned, Los Angeles slacker Jeffrey the Dude Lebowski. The movie starts with him getting assaulted in his home by a couple of enforcers sent by Jackie Treehorn, who is owned money by the wife of another Jeffrey Lebowski. One of the goons destroys the dude's rug. Advised by the dude's bowling partners, Vietnam veteran Walter Sobchak and Donnie Karabatsos, the dude goes and visits the Big Lebowski, or the other Jeffrey Lebowski. He eventually convinces Brandt to take a different rug. He obviously tricks him into it. Brandt is Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, played really interesting, almost like just so on edge, and it's just tremendous. And when the dude is leaving with his rug, he meets Bunny, who is the Big Lebowski's kind of trophy wife. So soon after the dude gets home, he gets a call from Brandt thinking, oh, obviously it's about the stolen rug. And then he's got to go back and try and find Bunny, who apparently was just kidnapped. So again, lots of different stuff happens. It's amazing. Just the way there's a confidence in some of the characters, and the way that they all kind of approach each scene is so fascinating. And each character kind of comes in, and this is just the way the Coen brothers do it, but each character kind of comes in and out seemingly out of nowhere, and it's just really, really well done. Eventually Maude, who is the Big Lebowski's daughter, who is played by Julianne Moore, she comes on the scene, and basically she kind of lets the dude know that Bunny kind of, you know, is already involved with a lot of these characters. She's not really kidnapped. She probably kidnapped herself. And turns out that the Big Lebowski kind of kept the money for himself. And there's a big confrontation outside after they all kind of figure everything out and tell the Big Lebowski to go fuck himself or whatever. And they're going home, and the dudes that supposedly kidnapped Bunny were trying to get this money out of the dude and Walter and Donnie. And there was never any money anyway, man. The Big Lebowski took it, and these guys were just fighting. So Walter kind of goes Vietnam on these guys and snaps. And then poor Donnie has a heart attack and dies. And there's just something about, there's a eulogy at the end where Walter is talking about Donnie and Donnie's life. And it slowly kind of devolves into this diatribe about Vietnam, and it is so funny and so wild, and it's just like one of those things where I guess you could see someone doing that. It's really, really interesting. I mean, the way the Coen brothers write their movies, right? They tend to have some characteristics of their characters to be very relatable, and then some of them to almost, I mean, some characters almost have a supernatural ability. I guess if you're talking about Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, it's basically Homer's Odyssey, so some of them have like actual powers and stuff, but there's just a really interesting relatability to the Coen brothers characters. I guess Fargo is another great example of just normal people that there's a I guess it's what something like The Office is built on, that there is something so interesting kind of in the mundane happenings of day-to-day life that even though it may seem, monotonous and like trivial, there's actually so much deep meaning, and everyone that is going through that, they're going through that mode, but underneath it all, there's so much more brewing. Anyway, it just makes for a very interesting palette in that sense. When you're writing a movie, you can create a lot of different sub kind of plots, if you will, or even just in scenes, you can add richness to the fact that, it's just a boring scene, in a convenience store or in a grocery store, but that these characters have different emotions and stuff under the surface, and they're just going through what they have to do to live a normal kind of social life. Who knows, right? It's pretty deep. It's wild. It's out there. But I always find that with those Coen brothers movies, that although it may seem superficial, there's always something brewing under the surface, which is so realistic and so true to life. The one really cool thing about The Big Lebowski is its soundtrack. It has a tremendous soundtrack, really eclectic. If you want to go out and find the soundtrack itself, go listen to it. Amazing songs on there, all types of different artists. The Coen brothers, when they were trying to figure out the music for the movie, they asked T-Bone Burnett, who I mentioned in the folk music podcast. T-Bone Burnett, who would later work on with the Coens on Oh Brother, Where Art Thou and Inside Llewyn Davis, like I mentioned in the folk music podcast. Go check that out. They asked T-Bone to pick the songs for the soundtrack of the film. While the Coens were writing the screenplay, they had Kenny Rogers just dropped in to see what my condition was in, the Gypsies King cover of Hotel California, and several Creedence Clearwater Revival songs in mind. So it's really cool. When I was doing that research and found that fact, it's like, the Coen brothers, when they're writing the movie itself, they actually have songs in mind, which is actually really interesting. I never thought of it like that. They knew they wanted different genres of music from different times, but as Joel remembers, T-Bone even came up with some far out Henry Mancini and Yma Sumac. Burnett was also able to secure songs by Kenny Rogers and the Gypsy Kings, and also added tracks by Captain Beefheart, Moondog, and Bob Dylan's The Man in Me. The one thing is, he did have trouble securing the rights to Townes Van Zandt's cover of the Rolling Stones' Dead Flowers, which plays over the film's closing credits. So either, I guess T-Bone really wanted it, or the Coens did, but former Stones manager Alan Klein actually owned the rights to the song, and he wanted $150,000 for it. Burnett convinced Klein to watch an early cut of the film and remembers it got to the part where the dude says, "I hate the fucking Eagles, man," which is a classic line. And Klein stands up and says, "That's it. You can have the song. That was beautiful." Burnett was going to be credited on the film as music supervisor, but he asked his credit to be music archivist because he hated the notion of being a supervisor. He was quoted as saying, "I wouldn't want anyone to think of me as management." For Joel, the original music, as with other elements of the movie, had to echo the retro sounds of the 60s and the early 70s. To them, the music defined each character. So, For example, Tumbling Tumbleweeds by Bob Nolan was chosen for The Stranger at the time the Coens wrote the screenplay. So The Stranger is Sam what's his name again? I always forget. Sorry, brother. There you are. Sam Elliott. Sam Elliott's character is The Stranger, who's like the narrator and, you know, potentially someone else. But that song Tumbling Tumbleweeds was kind of his signature, as was Lou Yelm by Henry Mancini was for Jackie Treehorn. The German Nihilists are accompanied by Technopop, and Jeff Bridges by Creedence. So like I said, there's basically a musical signature for each of the characters. And again, you know, that's a really interesting device where it's really cool with movies when you kind of notice these little things, or obviously these are from interviews, so it's the filmmakers talking about it. But when you notice certain things, like I truly believe, like, especially in the great movies, maybe in some movies that are kind of become accidental hits, things happen by accident, but I don't think anything ever happens by accident. I think each little thing, every bit of the scene that we see, someone's had a hand in doing it. That's what's amazing about movies. So to think and to know that the filmmakers are doing stuff like this and creating music, not only creating music that's score, which kind of makes sense, but using original songs that kind of match the characters' personalities, I think that's super, super cool. And that's what really, really makes these movies in depth. And I know that the Coen brothers, that's how much effort they put into their movies, for sure, which is amazing. It's funny, you know, this movie, when it first came out, it kind of received mixed reviews. It's kind of one of those movies that, again, when you watch it for the first time, it's bizarre. It's really out there. It kind of has you know, like I mentioned, that really superficial story of, you know, someone coming, destroying a guy's rug. A guy has to get a new one, and he gets kind of wrapped up in this bullshit story. But again, the more you watch it, the more layers you see. And again, the more it's revealed that there's so many intricate little pieces that maybe the plot might be, you know, might be pointless, like they said with those Chandler stories. But again, that intricacy comes out, which is so fascinating. And at the end of the day, sometimes when it doesn't mean anything, it's, again, another commentary on life, that sometimes things, you know, like they say on It's Always Sunny, sometimes things just end. But over time, the reviews became largely positive, and the film became a cult favorite. Again, noted for its eccentric characters, its comedic dream sequences, idiosyncratic dialogue, and eclectic soundtrack. Again, all the stuff we just talked about. In 2014, the film was selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry by the Library of Congress, being deemed culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. So again, one of those movies that becomes a cult classic that's almost mainstream. I don't even know if you can actually see this on screen, but I have a little bowling ball back here, which is actually a Big Lebowski bowling ball. It's almost like, again, I guess you could call Nightmare Before Christmas a cult classic. You call Rocky Horror Picture Show a cult classic. Like, they're cult classics, but they're so mainstream and everyone knows about them. I guess you could consider that cult, in the sense where it's not everyone loves it. Maybe it's known, but that doesn't mean everyone loves it. Is a cult classic only when a few people like it, or has a very esoteric audience? I don't know. Or is a cult classic something that most people hate and there's only a few people that really love? I don't know. But the few people that really do love this movie, at least some of them put on this thing called Lebowski Fest, which is so cool. And I remember hearing about it and thought it was so cool, and I always wish I wanted to go to it, or I wish I always got to go to it. I think they're still doing it. Obviously tough with COVID now. Lebowski Fest is an annual festival. It actually began in 2002 in Louisville, Kentucky, celebrating the Big Lebowski. In addition to its home city of Louisville, Lebowski Fest has been held all over the U.S., and it's typically held over 2 nights, and it features a screening of the film, of course, live music, and a bowling party attended by fans of the movie. Many of them dress as characters of the movie, and obviously they go over the top. They find really cool characters in the movie to dress up. Obviously, not just the big 3, but Walter is always going on wild rants about Vietnam and his friends that died face down in the muck. And I remember seeing a picture from Lebowski Fest of some guys that painted their face and wore camouflage and said that they were the guys that died face down in the muck. Again, there's little things in the movie, right? Like, the dude drinks a lot of White Russians, which is just, it becomes one of those key factors, and they talk about that all the time at Lebowski Fest and everything. Now again, like I mentioned before, the Coen brothers movies, they have a complexity, they have a richness, they have a depth to them, while still maintaining that kind of shallow superficial feel. But there's been a lot of fan theories about kind of what this movie means. And that being said, sometimes who knows if there's actually that kind of meaning past than what they kind of show you on the screen. I mean, any movie, you can kind of look at it and think, okay, the writers were thinking about this, they had all these influences. And you kind of think past the movie, if that world was still going, what was happening before, all these different aspects to try and figure out the plot and make sense. But again, sometimes movies really truly only exist from start to finish, and your mind has to kind of go, okay, if the screenwriters or the filmmakers didn't actually explain it to us in that hour and a half or 2 hour period, that's not on the table anymore. But I think a lot of people, when they're trying to come up with fan theories, they just bring everything in and they kind of go wild. So some of these fan theories are out there, but some of them are pretty cool. So one of the fan theories that I actually think is really cool is the Sam Elliott character, the Stranger. And he's really interesting. He's kind of like a Western dude, and he's also the narrator of the movie. And rarely do you see. So there's a couple scenes where the dude and the Stranger actually speak to each other and they meet. And there's actually some theory that the Stranger kind of is like God, basically. And, it's really interesting. Who knows that if that's true, that doesn't necessarily change or alter the outcome of the movie. But it's really interesting to think that, well, maybe this is this omniscient, omnipresent voice, person telling us the story. And all of a sudden the Coen brothers, chose to personify him actually in the movie. Really interesting. Another theory is that the dude is actually the Big Lebowski's illegitimate son. So that's why they have the same name. And, maybe the Big Lebowski had him out of wedlock when they were little kids. The Big Lebowski had him out of wedlock when he was younger, and then all of a sudden he comes back, and just so happens that they have the same name. Who knows? That's an interesting one. Another interesting theory we came across was the trio. So Donnie, Walter, and the dude. They represent different takes on the American dream. So the dude represents the American concern for doing the right thing. Very interesting. Walter is the proud, self-proclaimed war hero, and Donnie just wants to kind of get by in life. Basically, the ignorance is bliss kind of thing. So very interesting, kind of different takes. I mean, it's an interesting device, kind of using the trio in writing, because you basically, with 3 different personalities, you can kind of get different viewpoints on almost any situation. And again, Walter was obviously crazy wild, super out there, super in your face. Donnie is the complete opposite. He almost doesn't say anything at all and stays in the background. And then the dude is literally neutral as hell. Some Zen some Zen Buddhist masters actually have looked at the dude and the way he acts and the way his philosophies are, and say that the dude basically embodies the entire Zen philosophy. So that's really, really interesting. Obviously, like I mentioned before, sometimes these movies don't really have any extra meaning to them. They're just there to be looked at. They're there to be portrayed. It's almost like a painting, right? Like certain paintings, you do love them because they have depth, because they have extra meaning. But then there's other paintings or sculpture where you just appreciate it for what it is. You just see it there and you can just take it, again, superficially for what it is. And I find the Coen brothers movies to be very much so like that. I talked a little bit about this in the folk music podcast where I talk about Inside Llewyn Davis. The Coen brothers movies tend to be this window into the characters' lives, whether for how long the movie goes on, whether it be a week, whether it be a month or a year. You just seemingly kind of come into this ongoing storyline and you kind of pick up the pieces as things go. They tell you the important things. And then as the story goes on, you kind of are learning the characters simply through their behavior. There isn't really explicit like, oh, here is what this person is and this is what they do. You kind of figure that out through the movie. So it's really interesting. So in some ways, it's almost like you kind of just got to take it for what it is. You got to just look at it and appreciate it, which is, again, it's almost like it's almost like a Zen practice where you're basically, you're just there to experience, and then you let the experience go, and time keeps moving and the storyline keeps going on, and they live their lives as you do, and you live your lives as they do, right? Whatever that means. Obviously I have some personal connections with the movie. I guess my parents were probably the first ones to show me, but anyway, I just remember watching the movie and just, I fucking fell in love with it. In high school, I would watch it all the time. In fact, in high school, I watched it, I watched it through, and then I watched it from start to finish, and then I just started the movie again. So yeah, maybe I was obsessed with it, but it was just amazing. I really got into bowling. I would drink white Russians if I had the chance. Obviously can't drink too many of those, but hey, they're tasty. But again, just really cool. I guess it was the aesthetic. Maybe it was the Zen mindset, but I just love this movie so much. And if you've never seen it, please go check it out. No matter what happens, this is a time where, if you're listening to this now, it is January 4th, 2022. Happy New Year, everyone, by the way. Ontario is about to go back into kind of a mini lockdown, which I never really thought was going to happen again. Super disappointing. But as the dude says, there's strikes and gutters and ups and downs, and you got to kind of keep rolling with it, right? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep rolling. Obviously we can't go out and bowl right now. Hopefully when things open up again, but again, that's all we can do in these times is kind of keep our head down and keep our chin up and our fucking nose to the grindstone and hit the deck, but stay on our motherfucking toes. But yeah, again, check out this movie if you've never seen it. If you'd like to support the podcast, go check us out on our Patreon, patreon.com/thebigmarkpod. There's lots of cool tiers and different ways you can support the podcast there. Hit us up on Twitter. Check us out on Instagram at the Bigmark Podcast, at the Bigmark Pod. Like I said, I always want to hear from you guys. Thank you so much. I love you all. Can't wait to hear from you. Bigmark abides. Take it easy. Peace.